CBS News. I'm Christopher Glenn at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. An hour from now at high noon here at the NASA Corral, there'll be the biggest shootout you ever saw, pitting the shuttle Challenger against the force of gravity. And if all goes as well during the launch as it has during the countdown, the shuttle will win for the 17th time, rocketing to Earth orbit and a week-long mission involving the European-built Spacelab, 7 crew members, 2 spider monkeys, and a couple of dozen rats. The animals are there to test some new space cages. The rats will be killed and examined on return to Earth, but not the monkeys. Animal rights activists are angry about the mammals on orbit, but a planned protest at the gates of the Space Center has not materialized. Right now, the hatch has been closed. Instruments monitoring all launch systems have not turned up any problems, and all appearances, Challenger will fly on schedule about 59 minutes hence. At the Kennedy Space Center in Florida, I'm Christopher Glenn. Doug Poling will have more news right after this.
This is a live special report from ABC News. I'm Bob Walker. John Bascom is at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida, where the shuttle Challenger is just less than 4 minutes now from launch on a 7-day Spacelab mission. And John, it's been only 10 days since we had a shuttle to land right there at the Space Center.
You're right, Bob, and that has NASA officials quite optimistic up here. They're very pleased that they were able to make such a quick turnaround. But just as we went on the air, Bob, there was a hole. This countdown has been performing flawlessly until just about 30 seconds ago. There was a problem with some locking mechanism, we're told, aboard the orbiter. And so now, instead of getting off directly at noon East Coast time, it looks like we're going to have a bit of a delay. We're not too clear right now what the hold is for, but we did start holding at 4 minutes.
Console that the lock strain back be started manually from the console, and that the countdown start 55 seconds after that. We'll stand by on when that countdown will start.
So it sounds like only
T-minus 4 minutes.
Sounds like a brief hold. That's the voice of Rocky Robb at Launch Control at the Kennedy Space Center. And so, John, we can only wait until see what they do.
As soon as they find that problem, Bob, they said they'll have it going again in about 55 seconds.
Reports that all 3 APUs are up and running. All indications normal.
3, 2,
Here we go.
Mark. Replenish and work. Copy, NTLS, 55 seconds, 45 seconds.
That's Lockheed Test Director Roberto Wyrick, the voice you're hearing.
LOX console reports that the LOX replenish and drain back has been initiated. We're standing by to resume the countdown, and that will occur in about 30 seconds.
So we only lost about 2 minutes off our scheduled launch time, Bob.
A very quick little glitch that was spotted and fixed very quickly. No problem in getting off right on time. There's a big launch window today of an hour or more. I think a couple of hours,
we'll have a final clear to launch when we resume the countdown.
That launch window, of course, is determined by the amount of daylight left at the abort site over in Spain, and that gives them, I think, 2 hours and 39 minutes to get this mission off today.
Right, John, so plenty of time for getting the launch underway.
Clock will resume on my mark. 3, 2, 1.
Mark, we are T-minus 4 minutes and counting.
4 minutes and counting. Let's go through sequence 4.
So it looks like it'll go about 2 minutes and 18 seconds after the hour.
The count has resumed. We are counting at T-minus 3 minutes, 48 seconds and counting.
That's one of the shortest pre-launch delays that we've ever had.
Seconds. We'll launch 2 minutes, 30 seconds, approximately after straight up noon.
Says something about the preparations for this flight, Bob. It has, as I said, gone flawlessly up until that point, 4 minutes before launch. They're very pleased not only with the preparations for this, the 17th shuttle flight, but as I said earlier, with the fact that they were able to turn around, have Discovery land, and get Challenger off 10 days later.
T-minus 3 minutes,
and this will be a very, very busy flight. 15 separate experiments on board. This is a Spacelab crew, and I understand, John, they're going to be working 2 12-hour shifts.
That's right. We're coming up now on 3 minutes.
3 minutes and counting.
The 7-man crew has been divided into a silver and gold team, working 12 hours on, 12 hours off around the clock for the 7-day period of this mission.
We are go for liquid oxygen pressurization of the external tank, T-minus 2 minutes 45 seconds.
John, weather has not been a problem like it was in the last launch. We had a delay because of the weather. It looks beautiful down there today.
It is, and one of the meteorologists said the reason for that, oddly enough, is that this is the same high-pressure system which enabled such a good launch for the last mission and a good landing. It's been around for 10 days, ever since Discovery touched down.
It is clearing as repeat, and no unexpected errors reported.
That's something that NASA can look forward to. You know, in several years down the road, they hope to have 2 launches every month. That is, 1 launch every 2 weeks. And so if you get a good weather pattern holding on the East Coast, that means they'll have consistently good launches, one after the other.
Coming up to T-minus 2 minutes from launch.
T-minus 2 minutes and counting.
So T-minus 2 minutes from launch coming up. 7 crewmen on board, a 7-day Spacelab mission. 2 monkeys and 2 dozen rats are also on board. A lot of weightlessness experiments.
That arm will be clear.
The umbilical arm now moving back in the huge external tank on the back of the shuttle. That's the only part of the shuttle vehicle that is not reusable. It will fall away somewhere over the Indian Ocean, into the midway into the first orbit. The 2 solid rocket boosters will fall off a little over 2 minutes after launch. They will plop into the Atlantic Ocean, will be recovered by the launch team's recovery vehicles and put back and reused at a later shuttle flight. 3 of these crew members have flown before. The commander, Bob Obermeyer, flew on STS-5 in November of '82. And the mission specialists, 2 of them, Norm Thagard and Bill Thornton, have flown before in June of '83 and in August of '83. ABC News live coverage of the launch of the shuttle Challenger. I'm Bob Walker. John Bascom is at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. We are less than 1 minute from liftoff. And John, things are going well now.
Things are going extremely well, Bob, and in less than a minute, Challenger will become the veteran of the U.S. Space Shuttle fleet.
45 seconds mark.
This will be
by now for the T-31 second auto sequence start.
This will be Challenger's 7th trip in space, more than any other shuttle.
T-minus 35 seconds.
It'll soon be all automatic.
T-minus 30 seconds and counting. We're now in auto sequence start. Challenger's 4 computers now controlling the critical vehicle functions from now through liftoff. T-minus 20 seconds and counting. T-minus 18 seconds and the T-minus 15, 13, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8, 7. Go for main engine start. 6. We have main engine start. All 3 engines have been running. 3, 2, 1, 0. SRB ignition, and Challenger in Spacelab 3 is airborne and has cleared the tower.
And a ferocious tower of fire now is pushing Challenger up toward the sun on its 7th trip into space. A thunder of 7 million pounds of thrust rolling along the Florida coast. A mountain of white vapor swelling up and obscuring Launchpad 39A. And going into orbit now for the 2nd time, Spacelab, for a week of experiments probing some of the mysteries of our universe. Commander Bob Obermeyer, pilot Fred Gregory, and the scientific crew of Challenger are upside down. When those solid rocket boosters drop off, Challenger will still have the equivalent of 37 million horsepower to put it in orbit 219 miles overhead.
Engine throttle back up 204%.
That's Steve Nesbitt in Houston.
Throttle confirmed. You are go at throttle up. Roger, Houston, go at throttle up. Velocity 2,800 feet per second. Altitude 9.8 nautical miles. Downrange distance 6 nautical miles.
This will be
1 minute 30 seconds. Velocity 3,400 feet per second.
A busier day than scheduled in space. They were going to wait till the final day to
normally running at 104.
launch 2 small satellites, but they decided to do that later on today, 5 hours from now. Matter of fact, they're going to launch 2 small satellites out of the payload bay to get that out of the way, and then concentrate strictly on science for the next 7 days.
Coming up on SRB separation. Velocity 4,800 feet per second. Altitude 21 nautical miles.
And so the spacecraft Challenger is aloft. Now she'll spend another week in orbit. A successful launch following the recovery of the last satellite, the Discovery, which landed 10 days ago.
CBS News, this is Doug Poling. There was a short delay, but another shuttle launch from the Kennedy Space Center has been accomplished.
This
Christopher Glenn at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. The space shuttle has thrown off gravity shackles for the 17th time. Shuttle Challenger is in orbit, lifting off from the spaceport just an hour ago. There was a nervous moment 4 minutes before launch when a monitoring instrument indicated some trouble, but that glitch was fixed and a flawless liftoff followed, albeit 2 minutes late. To launch that close to time made a lot of NASA types very happy. They'd been embarrassed by a 2-month delay getting the last mission off the ground, the one which carried Senator Jake Garn of Utah. Garn is here again today, observing the Challenger launch from the firing room. Challenger will be up there for a week, carrying the 14-ton Spacelab once again, and some monkeys and lab rats who are trying out the latest in space cages. Air-to-ground communication has been minimal this first hour of the flight, a good indicator that all is going well. Christopher Glenn, CBS News at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida.
Time at the tone, 1 o'clock. CBS News, this is Frank Sebatani. Nicaragua's in orbit. Its 7-member crew is checking out equipment and working toward the planned launch of 2 small satellites within the next few hours. The shuttle was a couple of minutes late getting off the ground 2 hours ago because of problems on the ground.
CBS News, this is Paul Lockwood. The Challenger space shuttle mission, there have been glitches in the communication setup and with the shuttle's onboard plumbing. In addition, a mysterious malfunction prevented the scheduled deployment of one of 2 small satellites, which was left stranded in Challenger's cargo bay.
Communist Vietnam marks the fall of Saigon a decade ago. West Germany prepares to welcome President Reagan on a controversial visit. Shuttle Challenger faces challenges. Good morning. This is Bill Lynch with the CBS World News Roundup. Oriented mission of the Shuttle Challenger and its crew of 7. This morning there's a new problem, failure of the main Spacelab computer. As Sandy Gilmore reports, it isn't the first glitch of the mission.
Around midnight Eastern Time, a musical wake-up call for the next shift on the Space Shuttle Challenger. After 20 or so hours in orbit, there have been some problems. An airlock latch would not open, and that meant no pictures of deep space from the shuttle's wide-field camera.
The outer hatch latch handle will not rotate quite far enough.
The water dispenser would not work for a while.
As far as we know, we did nothing to get it to work. It just all of a sudden started working again.
They couldn't fire off the Pentagon's relay satellite, just a small experimental one, and the lavatory would not work and had to be shut down. NASA called those problems just niggling and said they did not threaten the main mission of the flight to do experiments utilizing the near-zero gravity of space. The 24 rats and 2 monkeys aboard were reported in good shape despite problems with feeding and watering a couple of the rats. The flight director said a monkey smiled at a crew member who looked into the cage. Sandy Gilmore, CBS News, Johnson Space Center, Houston.
From Europe, President Reagan set to clamp a trade embargo on Nicaragua. Polish riot police put down May Day protest by Solidarity supporters. Good morning. This is Bill Lynch with the CBS World News Roundup. Stand for an extra day of the troubled flight of Shuttle Challenger. Among other problems, the crew has been told to wear surgical masks when working in the Spacelab capsule so they won't have to inhale debris coming out of rat cages. There was more fighting overnight.
Clock.
The Big 7 begins Bond Summit talks. Defense is on the Senate chopping block. Damning testimony in the Keno murder trial in Manila. Good morning. This is Bill Lynch with the CBS World News Roundup. President Reagan and other summit leaders kick off their bond talks. Summit security tightened after bomb incidents. The Senate tackles Medicaid. Good morning. This is Bill Lynch with the CBS World News Roundup. Their week-long flight, now more than half over, has managed to overcome yet another problem, rewiring an electrical power circuit to a key experiment in order to get around a short circuit. We get an update this morning from Sandy Gilmore, covering Mission Control in Houston.
Dr. Taylor Wang has been able to get his experiment working. Dr. Wang developed this experiment over a 9-year period, and for the first 3.5 days aboard the Shuttle Challenger, Dr. Wang was unable to get it started because it kept blowing fuses, but it's been working quite well, and Dr. Wang surely is pleased at having been able to salvage that experiment.
How are the animals doing and all the debris floating around the cabin?
And the men aboard seem to have solved that problem as well as they can. They've simply taken a vacuum cleaner through the air to get some of the particles out which were bothering them. Mission Control says that about every 30 minutes the air is completely filtered in the shuttle. So they say there's no health problem or any sanitation problem now posed by those leaking cages. The animals themselves are reported by NASA to be doing just fine.
Correspondent Sandy Gilmore reporting this morning from Houston.
With your core radio set at AM 740. KTRH Houston. Now, News Radio 740 AM.
CBS News, this is Mitchell Krause. President Reagan Challenger will disembark in just under 12 hours at Edwards Air Force Base in California. Right now, they're completing stowage of their complicated gear and winding up several scientific experiments. Now this.
Toll-free number, 800.
A Marine helicopter crashes in the Pacific. President Reagan heads for Spain after a controversial West German trip. Space Shuttle Challenger prepares to come home. Good morning. This is Bill Lynch with the CBS World News Roundup. Today on the long desert runway at Edwards Air Force Base in California, Christopher Glenn is at the landing site.
There's some concern at this desert landing field about weather conditions. True, the sky is clear, but the winds are shifting, tricky, and blowing hard enough right at the moment to be close to the wind speed constraints against a landing. Challenger is landing here in California because of what happened to Discovery on the last mission landing in Florida, a blown tire after the brakes had to be applied sooner than desired. NASA's C.J. Fenwick.
That's some of the reason why we're coming here to Dryden for the landing. And that is that we have several runways that are the kind where we don't have to apply brakes whatsoever.
It's a semi-satisfied space crew that returns to Earth today, satisfied with the amount of experimental data that has been gathered during the flight, probably dissatisfied that it took literally days to get some of those experiments cranked up and working properly, and of course with the waste containment problems they had from the monkey and rat cages. Christopher Glenn, CBS News at Edwards Air Force Base in California.
CBS News, this is Judy Muller. The crew aboard Challenger, due to land a couple of hours from now, battened down the hatches this morning with some difficulty. Christopher Glenn reports from Edwards Air Force Base in California.
Challenger at last seems ready to come home after one final problem for this problem-plagued flight was resolved. An instrument failed and there was no way except by eyeball to verify that the payload bay doors had been closed and latched for re-entry. It's a semi-satisfied space crew coming down in about 2 hours, satisfied with the amount of experimental data they were able to gather during the flight, probably dissatisfied that it took literally days to get some of those experiments cranked up and working, and undoubtedly less than pleased with all the bother caused by waste material that got loose from the cages of the monkeys and rats aboard. Christopher Glenn, CBS News at Edwards Air Force Base in California.
News. This is Jackie Judd. President Reagan an hour away from touchdown at Edwards Air Force Base in California after a week-long scientific mission.
Right about now, Challenger's main engines are being fired up to push the spacecraft out of orbit and start it gliding home. The target is large, a 7.5-mile-long runway on the even vaster Rogers Dry Lake bed. There's a reason the landing is here today instead of in Florida, as was the case for the last 4 shuttle flights. Last time, you recall, Discovery blew a tire when the brakes had to be applied sooner than usual. Here, according to NASA's Nancy Lovato, they shouldn't have to touch the brakes much at all.
We have plenty of lakebed runways, and if a problem should occur on braking, it will be no problem because they've got a lot of room to roll out.
And NASA says that shortly after the rollout, the Challenger's brakes will be pulled out and examined, the better to try to understand what happened to cause that previous tire failure. Right now, about an hour from the spacecraft's scheduled landing. Christopher Glenn, CBS News at Edwards Air Force Base in California. News. I'm Christopher Glenn, reporting from Edwards Air Force Base in California, where we await the landing of Space Shuttle Challenger about 10 minutes from now. The crew successfully performed its deorbit firing of the main spacecraft engines over the Indian Ocean about an hour ago, and since has been plunging, glowing hot through the atmosphere. Just about now, Challenger should be passing over Los Angeles, where residents will probably be able to hear twin sonic booms, but probably not spot it. Still too high and too cloudy down there. Here in the desert, though, it's bright, sunny, visibility over 25 miles, and the crowd of more than 10,000 people scattered around this huge, dusty bowl that is the dry lakebed runway should have a lovely view. This is the first time in 5 landings that the shuttle has returned to California. NASA is still worried about the tire that Discovery blew last time landing in Florida, a mishap partially blamed on hard braking. Here, with 7.5 miles of runway to roll out on, they may not have to use the brakes at all. I'm Christopher Glenn at Edwards Air Force Base in California. More news in a minute with Judy Muller.
Report from ABC News. I'm Bob Walker, and the Shuttle Challenger is coming home after a 7-day Spacelab mission. 7 astronauts on board. A beautiful day at Edwards Air Force Base in the Mojave Desert in Southern California. In a highly successful scientific mission. A left overhead turn. You hear that voice? That's Brian Welch of Mission Control in Houston. And the shuttle is visible on NASA monitors, outlined by that big blue California sky.
Reports the ship looks good, turning on the hack.
Let's listen to NASA as they bring it in.
Velocity now 660 feet per second, the altitude 20,000 feet. Descending at a range at a rate of 230 feet per second. The range now 11 nautical miles.
Just 11 miles. The shuttle passed over the southern tip of San Clemente and
2 minutes 5 seconds.
San Clemente and Catalina Islands, on over Los Angeles and Hollywood, then up to the northeast.
Range now 9 nautical miles.
To Edwards Air Force Base in the Mojave Desert. They're going to land on a dry lake bed and let it roll. After experiencing braking problems when the shuttle landed at Kennedy Space Center during the last mission, they decided to take it to Edwards where the runways are much longer and let it roll and roll on that dry lake bed. And this one is 13,000 pounds heavier than the last shuttle because of that Spacelab on board. All those experiments. And 14 out of the 15 worked beautifully. And their scientists are very delighted.
Challenger now approaching final, 6.6 nautical miles to touchdown. On glide slope on center line. Surface winds 210 at 5.
That was Dick Richards talking to Bob Obermeyer, the commander, on board.
5 knots out.
Telling him he's right on line.
Velocity of the orbiter 550 feet per second. Our altitude now 7,700 feet.
Brian Welch in Houston.
Descending at a rate of 170 feet per second. Range now 4.5 nautical miles.
The NASA
Touchdown
cameras
56 seconds.
providing us with a head-on view. The shuttle not much bigger than a DC-9.
Equivalent airspeed about 287 knots.
But it's not an airplane, it's a glider right now. And it drops like a brick. And it's coming down very fast.
2.2 nautical miles.
It'll flare up slightly to slow down as it comes up for landing. The gear are down now.
Down.
The nose gear, the 2 main landing gear are down. And now it's dropping slowly.
3 gears down and locked.
Starting to kick up the dust.
Touchdown.
Touchdown. The main gears are down, still up on 2 gears, 2 main gear. It'll roll and roll. Now slowly coming down in the Edwards Air Force Base desert.
Touchdown.
Main gear down. The shuttle is landed after a 7-day Spacelab mission. The astronauts bringing home a veritable treasure trove of scientific information. NASA's chief scientist, George Fichtel, says the mission has been an outstanding success in all regards.
Braking at the moment as Challenger rolls out on runway 17.
Some light braking now, as you heard, the commander, Bob Obermeyer. And the shuttle rolling to a halt. Those 14 experiments on board sent back enough information to fill 50,200-page books. Scientists will have fun with those for years to come. And a special jet is standing by to take the animals, the 2 monkeys and 2 dozen rats, back to Houston. That word from the Challenger, Bob Obermeyer.
Nice job, Bob, and welcome home, Spacelab.
Dick Richard says, welcome home to the Space Lab. They said when they got back to Edwards today that a nice cold beer would be nice, but I think they took a poll on board. They said, I think all of us would want an ice cream with chocolate and strawberries on it, so they can probably have that too. The Space Lab, a success, the landing a success for the Shuttle Challenger, home in California. I'm Bob Walker, and this has been a live special report from ABC News.
This is Jackie Judd. The shuttle has landed, safe and apparently sound, at Edwards Air Force Base in Challenger. Challenger came down about an hour ago after a week in space. Christopher Glenn reports on the crew and the critters.
The human beings are off, but the animals are still aboard that space-age ark known as Shuttle Challenger.
Challenger's crew is about clip now departing from the orbiter. And that's it. Thank you. Commander Bob Obermeyer, followed by pilot Fred Gregory, mission specialist Norm Taggart, payload specialist Ludwig Vandenberg, sailor Wang, mission specialist Don Wind, and mission specialist Bill Thornton.
The crew will be heading home for Houston soon. The 2 spider monkeys and 2 dozen rats are going back to the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. There, the rats will die in the name of science. The monkeys will not. They'll just have memories of the ride of their lives. It was a problem-filled mission. Experiments which took days to repair, animal waste floating out of the cages to devil the crew. But the scientists are delighted with the data that were gathered. NASA is delighted that the delays in launch and landing, which have plagued so many flights in the past, did not occur this time, and already preparations are underway in Florida for the next flight of Discovery, planned now for a little more than a month away. Christopher Glenn, CBS News, Edwards Air Force Base, California.